You know what's fascinating? Everywhere you look right now, people are asking the same question. If Israel truly sees Iran as its most serious strategic threat, if Israeli leaders constantly warn that Iran could be approaching the point where it might build a nuclear weapon, then why hasn't Israel simply ended the problem with a full invasion? Why haven't we seen Israeli tanks crossing borders, ground forces marching toward Iranian territory, and a massive war aimed at removing the threat entirely? On the surface, it seems like a simple question. Israel has one of the most capable militaries in the region. It has advanced technology, well-trained soldiers, and decades of combat experience. So if the threat is truly existential, why not act decisively and remove it once and for all? At first glance, the idea sounds logical. When people imagine military power, they often think of it as a tool that can simply be used whenever necessary. If the threat exists, eliminate it. If the enemy is dangerous, defeat them directly. But once you begin to look deeper into how modern wars actually work, the situation becomes far more complicated than most people realize. The hesitation is not simply about politics or diplomacy. It is not just about international pressure or the fear of criticism from other countries. The deeper reason is rooted in something far more serious: the chain reaction that a full invasion could trigger. Start with the most basic question of any military operation. How many soldiers can realistically be deployed? The Israeli Defense Forces are widely respected for their training, discipline, and technology. They are considered one of the most effective militaries in the region. But even the strongest military has limits. Israel's active duty forces number roughly around 170,000 personnel across all branches of the military. That includes the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, intelligence units, and specialized defense forces. On paper, that may sound like a large number, but those troops are not sitting idle waiting for a distant war. Israel faces constant security pressures on multiple fronts. Forces must remain stationed near Gaza. There are troops deployed throughout the West Bank. Significant military resources are positioned along the northern border to monitor tensions with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Air defense units operate around major cities to intercept rockets and missiles. Naval forces patrol coastal waters to protect maritime routes and infrastructure. These responsibilities cannot simply be paused. They are permanent security commitments. Once those responsibilities are accounted for, the number of troops available for a large external operation shrinks dramatically. Analysts estimate that perhaps around 60,000 to 70,000 active personnel could realistically be redirected toward a major campaign outside Israel's borders. That number may sound significant, but when you compare it to the scale of Iran, the imbalance becomes obvious very quickly. Iran is not a small target. It is one of the largest countries in the Middle East, covering roughly 1.6 million square kilometers of territory. Its population exceeds 85 million people. The country is filled with mountain ranges, deserts, and large urban centers. Invading a country of that size is not simply a matter of defeating its army in a few battles. To control territory, protect supply lines, and maintain stability, a much larger force is required. Military planners often rely on rough estimates for occupation forces. A commonly cited guideline suggests that roughly 20 security personnel are required for every 1,000 civilians to maintain meaningful control during counterinsurgency operations. When that ratio is applied to a population the size of Iran's, the numbers quickly become staggering. The force required to maintain control would likely exceed 500,000 troops. that is several times larger than the number of forces Israel could realistically deploy. Some people respond to this argument by pointing to Israel's reserve system. Israel indeed maintains a large reserve force that can be mobilized in times of crisis. In theory, hundreds of thousands of reservists could be called up to support military operations, but the reality of reserve mobilization is more complicated than it appears on paper. Reservists are not full-time soldiers. They are civilians who leave their regular jobs and families when they are called to serve. They include engineers, doctors, teachers, technicians, factory workers, and business owners. When hundreds of thousands of reservists are mobilized, the impact spreads throughout the entire economy. Hospitals lose medical staff, companies lose skilled employees, factories slow down production, entire sectors of the economy begin to feel the strain. Over the past several years, Israel has already relied heavily on reservists during periods of conflict and heightened security tensions. Repeated mobilizations place enormous pressure on both society and the economy. Calling up hundreds of thousands of additional reservists for a prolonged overseas war would create major internal challenges that could last for months or even years. Even if the manpower issue could somehow be solved, another major problem immediately appears. A ground invasion of Iran would not occur in isolation. The moment Israeli troops entered Iranian territory, the strategic environment across the entire region would change overnight. The most immediate risk would likely come from the north. Along Israel's northern border lies Lebanon, where Hezbollah operates as a powerful armed group with significant military capabilities. Over the years, Hezbollah has built a large arsenal of rockets, missiles, and defensive infrastructure. Many analysts believe that Hezbollah possesses tens of thousands of fighters and a vast network of tunnels, fortified positions, and launch sites. Since the mid-2000s, Hezbollah has studied Israeli military tactics carefully. It has spent years preparing for the possibility of another large confrontation. If Israel committed a large portion of its ground forces to a distant invasion of Iran, the balance of forces along the northern border would change dramatically. A moment like that could present a powerful incentive for Hezbollah to escalate the conflict. Imagine the situation from a strategic perspective. Israeli forces are deployed hundreds of kilometers away in Iranian territory. Supply lines stretch across long distances. Military leadership must divide its attention between multiple battlefronts. At the same time, Hezbollah could attempt to open a major conflict along Israel's northern border, launching rockets and potentially attempting incursions into Israeli territory. Israel's national security doctrine has always emphasized preventing enemy forces from entering Israeli communities. The idea that hostile fighters could capture or hold Israeli towns, even temporarily, carries enormous psychological and political consequences. Such a scenario would create intense pressure on the government and military to respond immediately. This creates the risk of a multi-front war that stretches Israel's manpower and resources to their limits. Fighting a large campaign hundreds of kilometers away while simultaneously defending borders at home would be an extremely complex and dangerous situation. But the risks do not stop there. One of the most significant strategic concerns revolves around nuclear weapons. Iran does not officially possess an operational nuclear arsenal, but it has developed advanced nuclear technology and has accumulated enriched uranium over time. Many international assessments suggest that Iran could potentially build a nuclear device if it made the political decision to do so. Until now, Iran has stopped short of crossing that final threshold. Developing a nuclear weapon carries serious consequences, including stronger sanctions and greater international isolation. But a full-scale invasion could change that calculation dramatically. If Iranian leaders believed that their country faced an existential threat from a foreign invasion, the incentive to develop a nuclear weapon quickly could become overwhelming. History shows that countries often pursue nuclear deterrence when they feel vulnerable to invasion. Possessing nuclear weapons dramatically changes how other nations approach conflict. Ironically, a ground invasion intended to prevent nuclear development could actually accelerate it. The moment a government believes its survival is at risk, extreme measures suddenly become more acceptable. This possibility creates an extremely dangerous strategic dilemma. Nuclear deterrence relies on the idea that both sides understand the devastating consequences of nuclear war. If multiple countries in a region possess nuclear capabilities, the risk of catastrophic escalation increases dramatically. Geography also plays a role in this calculation. Israel is a relatively small country with much of its population concentrated in a few major urban areas. Iran, by contrast, is geographically vast, with large cities spread across a wide territory. In a theoretical nuclear exchange, both sides would face terrible losses, but the long-term consequences could look very different depending on geography and population distribution. Strategic planners must consider these realities carefully. A decision that appears bold on the surface could unleash consequences that cannot be easily controlled. Another critical factor is international support. For decades, Israel has maintained a close relationship with the United States, which has provided military technology, intelligence cooperation, and diplomatic support. However, launching a full-ground invasion of a large regional power would place enormous pressure on international alliances. The United States itself spent many years engaged in major military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those conflicts demonstrated how difficult it can be to stabilize and control large countries with complex political and social dynamics. Public opinion in many countries today shows little appetite for another prolonged conflict in the region. Logistics would also become extremely complicated. Sustaining a major military operation far from home requires enormous amounts of fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and food supplies. Those resources must travel through airspace or territory controlled by other countries. Regional governments would face difficult political decisions about whether to allow such operations to pass through their territory. Many countries might tolerate limited military strikes or defensive actions, but supporting a long-term ground invasion would be a very different situation. When you combine all of these factors, a clear picture begins to emerge. A large invasion would require far more troops than Israel can easily deploy. It risks opening additional fronts with powerful regional actors. It could accelerate nuclear development rather than prevent it. It would place enormous pressure on international alliances and supply routes. Every step deeper into that scenario increases the risk of escalation that spreads far beyond the original conflict. This helps explain why the strategy often observed in the region looks very different from a full-scale invasion. Limited strikes, intelligence operations, and diplomatic pressure aim to slow or disrupt potential threats without crossing the threshold into a war that could engulf the entire region. Such actions are not designed to completely eliminate the problem overnight. Instead, they are intended to manage the situation, delay dangerous developments, and maintain strategic balance while avoiding the catastrophic consequences that a full invasion could trigger. In other words, the absence of a ground invasion is not simply hesitation. It reflects the reality that modern warfare involves layers of risk that go far beyond the battlefield. Sometimes the most powerful decision a country can make is not launching the largest possible attack, but avoiding the chain reaction that such an attack could unleash.